Page 1. The Black Death, Dorsey Armstrong, 2016. The world's most devastating plague. Dorsey Armstrong, Ph.D. Professor of English, Purdue University. Dr. Dorsey Armstrong is a professor of English at Purdue University, where she has taught since 2002. She received her A.B. in English and Creative Writing from Stanford University and her Ph.D. in Medieval Literature from Duke University. She also has taught at Centenary College of Louisiana and at California State University, Long Beach. Dr. Armstrong's research interests include medieval women writers, late medieval print culture, and the Arthurian legend, on which she has published extensively. She is the author of Sir Thomas Malory's Morte Darthur, a new modern English translation based on the Winchester Manuscript and Gender and the Chivalric Community and Malory's Morte Darthur. In January 2009, she became editor-in-chief of the academic journal Arthuriana, which publishes cutting-edge research on the legend of King Arthur, from its medieval origins to its modern enactments. Dr. Armstrong's most recent book, Mapping Malory, Regional Identities and National Geographies in Le Morte Darthur, co-authored with Kenneth Hodges, is an exploration of the role played by geography in Malory's version of the story of King Arthur. Her current research project focuses on how medieval society reacted to and thought about twins and higher-order multiple births in literature and society. Other great courses taught by Dr. Armstrong include Turning Points in Medieval History, The Medieval World Analysis and Critique, How to Engage and Write About Anything, Great Minds of the Medieval World, and King Arthur, History and Legend. Scope. In the mid-14th century, the medieval world experienced one of the most devastating pandemics to ever strike humankind, the Black Death. Between 1346 and 1353, this disease, commonly thought to be some form of bubonic plague, swept across Europe from the east in a clockwise motion, tightening around the medieval world like canoes. When it was finally over, at least half of the population was dead. Social structures, political and economic infrastructure, familial relationships, religious institutions, and more were all dramatically affected and, in many cases, irrevocably altered. Indeed, many scholars believe that it was the plague that served as the catalyst that began the process of transforming the medieval world into the modern one. In this course, we'll explore the Black Death from multiple angles in order to understand how this pandemic originated, spread, and transformed the medieval world. Beginning with a discussion of what the medieval world looked like on the eve of the Black Death, we'll go on to examine plague's epidemiology and mode of transmission and then trace its progression across the 14th century landscape. We'll see how plague was a key component of one of the first recorded instances of germ warfare, and how the city-states of Italy unwittingly facilitated plague's initial movement into the medieval world along its advanced and comprehensive trading networks. We'll examine first-person accounts from places like Florence, Sicily, Siena, Avignon, and more, in which the writers describe a landscape of death in once bustling city centers, mass graves in public piazzas, a panicked mass exodus to the countryside, bodies lying in the streets or walled up in houses, and psychosocial responses that ranged from self-punishment to hedonistic orgies to pragmatic stoicism. As we explore the plague's progression, we'll spend some time with some of the most recent theories about its source and transmission, including the recent discovery that gerbil not rats may have been one of the primary vectors of transmission. We'll also look at the range of arguments from many scholars that there was something besides bubonic plague raging through the medieval world at this time. A virulent strain of tuberculosis, anthrax exposure, an animal murrain that had leaped to humans, a heretofore unknown hemorrhagic fever similar to Ebola, and bacteria raining down from space. These and more are all explanations that have been put forward to explain why the mid-14th epidemic was so deadly. As we track the plague's progress across the medieval world, we'll pause to perform case studies of individual communities who coped with the plague in unique ways. In Florence, we'll see how the government struggled to maintain normalcy and order in the face of utter devastation. In Avignon, we'll see how the seat of the papacy under Pope Clement VI attempted to cope with a threat not only to the population, but also to ecclesiastical authority. In Walsham, we'll see how a typical English village and manor estate was transformed when roughly 70% of the population died in the space of a few months. We'll examine how the greatest medical and scientific minds of the day attempted to explain and cope with the Black Death, identifying planetary conjunctions, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and bad air or miasma as the cause of infection. We'll see how the Scandinavian countries and what is today Poland and Russia had a very different reaction to plague than did most of the rest of the medieval world, especially in terms of folklore and traditions in the countryside. We'll meet the flagellants, who traveled from town to town and whipped themselves in public displays of fleshly humiliation, attempting by these means to appease God and obtain His mercy. We'll see how the Church's authority was radically undermined when members of the clergy died in record numbers and those who were left often refused to perform the duties of last rites or did so only reluctantly. While the institution of the Church suffered, popular religious practices were very much in evidence, as there was an increase in the practice of pilgrimage to holy sites. New plague saints became the recipients of prayers from an increasingly desperate population. In this course, we'll also examine the few exceptions to the ruly communities that were somehow spared during the initial outbreak. Milan was saved by the policies of its draconian ruler, Nuremberg by its unusually advanced systems of sanitation and culture of hygiene, and Iceland by luck and timing. After the initial discombobulation caused by the outbreak of plague, medieval society attempted to get back to normal, but it was a new normal, one that was constantly disrupted by continued outbreaks of plague every generation or so. In response to the Black Death, new art forms and literature came into existence. Indeed, the careers of writers like Geoffrey Chaucer may have been made possible by the arrival of plague and the possibility for social mobility that came with it. In the end, the medieval world was utterly transformed. For most of those who survived the plague, life was much better than it had been before. Religious institutions, economic practices, social and political infrastructure, and more were radically reshaped by the plague. From the ashes of the Black Death, a new world and the Renaissancia was born. Page 3.